CTSI Community Engagement Corps, third Thursday speaker series. We're excited to be here this evening for our discussion, how we all win community science and environmental justice. We are featuring members of the CAFEH research team, the Community Assessment of Freeway Exposure and Health this evening. We have Dr. Doug Brugge, who is the CAFEH PI from University of Connecticut, formerly of Tufts University. Here in Boston, as well as Lydia Lowe, who is from the Chinatown Land Trust, Ellin Reisner, Dr. Ellin Reisner, I should say, from the Somerville Transportation Equity Partnership, and Sharon from the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. So I'll ask that if you're not, that you have yourself on mute. If you're not asking a question during this evening's presentation, we're going to start off by hearing from each of our speakers. And then we will have a Q&A, and then we can open it up for Q&A. We are recording this evening's session, just to let you know. We'd like to make these talks available for folks who aren't able to make it during this time slot. So we will be recording this evening. Anything else, Dima, that I might be missing as we jump in? Okay, I got the thumbs up, so we can go to the next slide. And so our learning objectives for this evening are to really think about how do we sustain partnerships? How do we balance community priorities with constraints of research funding? How do we then engage in those difficult conversations which come along with balancing priorities with constraints of funding, as well as dynamics of power that play out within our institutions and our communities? How do we move from research into policy and action? It's important that we are generating knowledge, but that knowledge is only as useful as it is used. And so how do we then translate it into policy and action? And I think we have a lot to learn this evening from CAFEH in that realm. So you can click to the next slide. Great. And so I introduced our panelists already, so I'm already ahead of the game. And so maybe we can just jump in. Hearing a little bit from each of our panelists will give folks an opportunity to just take 2 minutes, introduce yourselves to the crowd, talk a little bit about your organization, the work that you do, and how it is that you got involved with the CAFEH study. And maybe we can, I don't know, maybe we'll start with Doug. Maybe we can start with you since Ellin isn't with us yet.
So just 2 minutes, brief background. I was at Tufts in the inception stages of this work. I really think it's a series of projects rather than a single project, and there's been a real mixing and matching and merging of different partners and different people in different parts of it. But and actually traffic-related air pollution, which is the focus of this work, and ultrafine particles in particular were not a focus of my research. I was approached by folks with the Somerville Transportation Equity Partnership, and hopefully Ellin, who's president of that organization and founder, will join us. They approached me first to serve as an expert, potentially serve as an expert witness in a legal case that they had filed regarding the Assembly Square area next to the highway in Somerville. When that was settled out of court, then they approached me and asked if I was interested in working with them on some research to document the hazards of associated with the highway, with pollution from the highway. And I always remember, because I was a little skeptical, like I didn't know them. I wasn't sure what they knew or whatever. But they really knew their stuff. They knew the literature and the science. You know, we might not agree on every nuance of it, but they were quite knowledgeable and convinced me that they would be viable partners and that we could do something. And and from that stage, we brought in other people, Chinatown with Lydia and others over a period of time, and started writing the first proposal. You know, I think, Linda, it's, I don't know how to bottle this for success, but we got funded with that proposal. It took 2 submissions, but it would have been very hard, I think, to get this off the ground if we had submitted over and over again and never gotten funded. So part of it is just threading the needle, as you know, and that you've done many times, as have I and others at NIH or at other major funders. So that was the starting point, and it's really grown and expanded and ballooned and become my major source of funding and publications for the last 15 years or so. I'll just leave it there for now because you wanted a brief introduction, but I think that maybe that captures what you were looking for.
Excellent. Sounds great. And Lydia, do you want to jump in next?
Sure. So at the time of I'm currently at the Chinatown Community Land Trust, but when I started participating in the CAFEH project, I was at the Chinese Progressive Association, which, actually are very similar and friendly, cooperating groups. But the Chinese Progressive Association is a little bit broader in its focus and also is a grassroots organizing focused group. So when I got involved in CAFEH, it was interesting because we were not focused at all on the topic of air pollution. Our real focus was on community control of development and gentrification. And, we also were not at all focused on research. Our focus was on organizing and action. So those were two kind of like things that were a little bit, outside of our priority. And so initially, when Doug approached us, my initial response was no, this does not fit. But I think that Doug convinced us to join the CAFEH study and we went along because Doug had been involved actually as a supporter in some of the advocacy work around community control of development in Chinatown. And he had been developing this argument, around traffic impacts and how the traffic impacts, were a part of the argument about community control of development. So, that was actually quite helpful in some of our development fights. So we're like, okay, we'll go along with this. Who knew that we would be involved in this project for like more than a decade, but we were. So, and I think in the course of it, we learned a lot.
Excellent. I think that key point, one key point I just heard you say is like when you said no, but the fact that you had that pre-existing relationship with Doug and that he had been involved in those local advocacy issues is probably something important that we researchers can hold on to, is that we can't just get involved for the ask, that we have to be involved in the community more broadly. I'm just highlighting that really important point you made. All right, so then we come around to Sharon. How did you get involved with all of this?
Well, compared to Lydia and Steph, I'm the new kid on the block. And I myself have been in CAFEH for about 5 years, and MATC has been involved for a little bit longer than that, I think around 7. We got involved after some of the initial research studies when CAFEH started thinking about how do we transition this great body of community-driven research into policy and municipal and statewide decision making. And so maybe just to take a step back, I work for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And so that the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is the regional planning agency for Boston and pretty much all the communities within the 495 Beltway. And regional planning is typically deals with activities like housing and infrastructure, like roads, and thinking about visions for the future and how our region evolves and grows. And I sit in the public health department. So with all of that, thinking about roads, we bring a public health perspective. How is this harming people? How could it benefit them? How can we, for example, build pedestrian plans and pedestrian walkways and bike networks in a way that can make people healthier and safer? So a little bit of that's where we're coming from. We deal a lot with policy. And so like Lydia, we don't typically do that much work on pure research, but this was a very interesting opportunity to start thinking through with folks who have that on the ground, deep technical knowledge and start translating it into policy and, like I said, municipal and statewide decision making.
Great. And so then in terms of, I don't know, Doug, if you want to talk about some of the other partners that are also involved, just because not everyone is here and able to be with us today.
Well, there's been a really wide range of partners, of organizational partners, but also of individuals who have participated from just, so, in terms of partners, newer community partners, the Welcome Project in Somerville, the university partners that included BU, Tufts is still involved with people who are there after I left, now UConn, but also Ellin College is now involved in one of our recent projects. And then organizationally, MAPC, but also the city of Somerville was involved in a couple of our grants directly as well. And so we've had a lot of the Boston Public Health Commission was involved in one of our projects. We've just had a wide range of different partners. There's not, for every grant, for every project, it's not exactly the same combination. But I would also say that the individuals from those organizations are quite variable also. We've had a lot of student involvement from high school through postdoc. The graduate students, the PhD students have been critical on some of our projects because they did most of the analysis and led to most of the outcomes of the research. And then, there's been a range of people from sort of grassroots to activists and staff of organizations from the communities. So it's been, and then within the researchers, it's quite diverse. There are people like you, Linda, who are social scientists, and Ellin. There are people like me who are public health researchers. There's folks who do air pollution monitoring and modeling who are environmental engineers. So it's a very broad group of people and organizations in each of our projects, really. So I think that's both a challenge and a strength, right? Because working across all those boundaries and is more challenging. If we were all really similar, or there were just a couple of us, like all social scientists in one community organization, it would be a lot simpler. I think it's complex, but it's also been a strength that we have moved in a lot of directions. Have research findings that are engineering to basic science to epidemiology to policy to social science, and we've had influence on the ground in places like Chinatown, which is here, and Somerville, but other places as well. So.
No, that's super helpful. And you kind of go into one of my first questions was really around when you think about the successes. And so maybe Sharon or Lydia, if you want to share, what have been some of the successes of the partnership that you've seen over the years and since your involvement? What would you say?
I also want to point out that Ellin has joined us.
Oh,
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, I apologize. I had it in my calendar for the wrong time.
Come on down. That's great.
Sorry.
No, welcome. We have with us Dr. Ellin Reisner from STEPS, Somerville Transportation Equity Partnership. We were just talking a little bit, folks had introduced themselves. We're talking a little bit about the partnership, and we were about to jump into successes, but maybe before we do that, if you want to just talk a little bit about, tell us a little bit about STEP and how you guys got involved with the partnership. Why?
Well, I don't know if Wig got a chance to talk yet, but STEP came together about 18 or 19 years ago to advocate for the Green Line extension, which is actually the first branch is going to open on Monday, which only took 18 years, but you got to persevere. But in the course of that, because of the Clean Air Act, is why we're getting the Green Line, we started to really look at the air quality in Somerville and approached Doug about doing research with us. And he said, well, when research with the engineering department at Tufts, Doug said, well, look, it's really bad in Chinatown too, the air quality. Why don't we see if they want to be involved in this? So that's how this all started.
So welcome. And so maybe we can just jump in a little bit, talk about some of the successes of your partnership when you think about the work that you've done over the years.
Do you want me to do it or Sharon? Because you were going to have Sharon.
I was saying Sharon or Lydia, or you can jump in.
Oh. The successes of the partnership. Well, there have been successes, I think, in terms of the collaboration opportunities that have developed through the course of this, working with, obviously with Chinatown, but also with MAPC and other partners that have gotten involved on some of the projects. So I think that's been really important. And I think we've had a huge amount of success in Somerville in terms of getting the city to take this very seriously and advocate for improvements. That's been major. The other thing that I think has been great is that people in Somerville, the residents, are very aware of this now as an issue, and they take it seriously, they bring it up, and we're in a very good place with regard to that. Now we just need to get the institutions in our society to respond to what we have identified. So that's what I would say. And I think the partnerships that we've developed are just been very, very meaningful.
Yeah, I feel like the impact has really snowballed over the years. And it's, to me, I've really felt it in the last few years. One thing, I mean, certainly, Somerville, I think, was a little bit out in front compared to Chinatown and Boston, but, Somerville really started getting the attention of the mayor and the city planners and, started putting, influencing planning so that developments near the highway would need to incorporate higher quality air filters. Started work. Then, there's an initiative to work on getting a sound wall, which also works as a barrier against both noise and, directing some of the air pollution upwards. In Chinatown, I think it's been a little bit slower, but I think we also made a really big leap in the last few years in people's awareness, particularly. And it wasn't all due to the direct activities that we did as CAFEH, but I think it kind of was a snowball effect because of all the different things that have happened. So residents are just very aware of air pollution as an issue now. They're also aware of the fact that, higher quality air filters is an important mitigation measure. And we actually have residents, asking their management, why can't we get better air filters, or actually getting them? But the other thing that I think was a big impact was working with the CAFEH project in the research to action phase. What we had decided to do was to develop some kind of health lens analysis. And through working together with MAPC in particular on that health lens analysis, it actually became an avenue and gave us the capacity to work on a Chinatown community-led master plan that we have continued to organize, that we were able to release. We, organize the community to participate in it, to publish it, and then we're continuing to organize around its implementation.
Sharon, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would say that so we, in the last 5 years, one of the big things was wrapping up these two health lens analyses in Somerville and Chinatown. And one of the accomplishments I think of those processes, in my view, is raising air quality in conversations where it wasn't already. And so not having the conversation be just about air quality as something that people should care about. But I'm a Somerville resident, and recently there's been a lot of conversations around I-93 in relationship to road safety. And I see air quality because of the CAFEH project, bringing it up in the conversation about, like, what does living next to a highway mean for you? It's naturally coming up of, like, we need to talk about safety at crossings, and we need to talk about the air quality impacts. And I would say that it was the same in Chinatown, although I don't see it naturally emerging in community conversations because of where I sit. In the HLA, we're having conversations about housing and air quality. It wasn't just talking about air quality, which felt like a very successful starting point. And I would say internal to MAPC, I've started to see that as well. Lydia, you used the word snowball, and I kind of feel that's what I've seen in MAPC in terms of awareness of this issue, especially in the last 2 years with COVID-19, drawing attention to how air quality and the burdens of air quality precipitated and where there was much more high burden of mortality and morbidity of COVID-19. I see in MAPC interest in this topic from the housing, the clean energy, our municipal collaborations, our government affairs, all people who might have thought of that as a public health issue beforehand, starting to see it as something that touches on their work as well.
Mhm.
Sounds like there's been a lot of increased awareness. I'm hearing also this sense of partnerships that are happening between organizations that might not have been happening prior to the CAFEH study. Doug, were you going to just chime in something?
Yeah, I just want to say for me, what they were all touching on, what was extremely gratifying in the last couple of years is when I saw spontaneous or organic is maybe a better word, expressions of concern about air quality that we didn't organize. We didn't even talk to people about it. You know, Lily in Chinatown did this whole project around washing, and then there was all these questions raised at a community meeting about the air quality, and I didn't even know until afterwards. In Somerville, Ellin, you know, that protest that was sparked by the pedestrian deaths, I guess. There were people holding signs that said ultrafine particles on them. I didn't even know these people, right? Who knows ultrafine? Who put the protest behind ultrafine particles? But to me, it's somehow we had crossed a barrier where we were sort of obscure and we were researchers and whatever, but somehow it reached a level of critical mass as sort of a tipping point or something, and became a topic that was organic and embedded within the population in these, you know, small scale, it's just communities, but it was real and had its own driving force behind it. We didn't have to pull it back and make it happen. That, to me, that was really important.
Ellin?
For those who don't know what Doug was referring to when he talked about Lily and washing, it was that there is a community art project called Washing that somebody who volunteers with our organization but was not affiliated with the CAFEH project initiated. And it was all about the history of highways in Chinatown and the impact of the highways. So they involved residents in talking about that and telling their stories. And, you know, in the course of that, you know, the air pollution issue really, you know, rose up, and it was but it was also like very integrated with all kinds of feelings about how the highway has impacted Chinatown.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was just going to say something that I think one of the things that's been really important about the collaboration on the Research to Action project is that working with MAPC has been a really great experience, and they have been able to take what they have participated in Somerville to other communities that, you know, where Sharon and Barry work. So a part of I think the things that are happening within MAPC are also happening in the communities in the 101 cities and not all of them, but many of the cities and towns you work in, which is the snowball in a lot of ways.
Yeah, 100%. And not only is it coming up, but I would say that maybe, I mean, this is a hypothesis that MAPC, had we not had the CAFEH partnership 5 years ago, would not be prepared to respond to those concerns when they came up. And because we've had the support from folks like Doug and academic teams to sort of build up our scientific foundation, and then also have trusted folks to reach out to when we have questions about sort of this health and environmental science piece behind questions, but also from the community groups of like, what does it mean from a community to actually respond to this research? And so like you have the research and so what? And so having the experience working with CAFEH has put us in a better position to have conversations with communities when this comes up in conversation.
And I think on our part, having CAFE and MAPC involved in doing the health lens analysis, which became our Chinatown master plan, just lent a lot of legitimacy to our process, and got us taken much more seriously by the city and BPDA as a result, I think.
Wondering, oh, go ahead, Ellin.
I was just going to say one thing. I mean, I'm sorry that I'm late and maybe this was discussed, but I think one of the things that has been really very important in terms of this, our working together with Chinatown is seeing the strategies that we have been able to use in Somerville are so different from the strategies in Boston because of the natures of the two cities. I mean, I can call the mayor directly. They might not, mayor might not like it, but I can call the mayor directly. But it's much harder in Boston to get attention for things. And I think that, our strategies have really developed along lines of how we can accomplish our best goals in the best ways. And we've, learned a lot of lessons.
Points all around. And one of the questions that we've had for partnerships like yours is how do you maintain it? How do you actually, engage in this bring people together from different agencies? Doug, you brought this up, from across different institutions. And how do you build those relationships? One of the things we hear oftentimes in the community engagement core is that, this takes a lot of time. This is, I don't know if I have time for this. And we don't always, sometimes it's hard we see students, but not investigators, and investigators are just concerned about the time it takes to do this. And so the partnerships sometimes get put on the back burner and we don't see that. Or we see partners that, aren't able to keep the momentum over time. And partnerships sometimes fade when funding fades. And I'm wondering, how have you all as a group, if you could speak a little bit to just the dynamics of partnership and how you kind of keep things going?
Well, first of all, do you want to go, Ellin?
No, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so first of all, I would say that, that you're right. It takes a lot of time. And every one of these gray hairs in my beard is from part of this. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's a lot of work. And, and the funding, NIH came around to supporting this kind of research, this community-based participatory research, just in time for us to get funded. And without that, it would have been a lot harder. But they don't give you extra money. You're still supposed to do the project plus all the relationships and the partnership building and all of that. So I think it is genuinely more work than a traditional research project. I think we've been pretty pragmatic as a group of people. I think we've had tension, we've had challenges, we've had crises that we've had to deal with, but we sort of bend but don't break, which I think has helped us a lot. And to sustaining it, we've just been very successful at getting funding too. It helps a lot. I notice, well, Sharon, you're a bit of an exception, but many partners, when the funding ends, they're not as available. And so having had continuous funding for almost 15 years and fairly large amounts, 3 of them are large, full NIH grants, and many others of smaller size. I guess 4 of them are really full NIH grants. That has helped a lot. And I don't know what the magic formula is to succeed at NIH or even other federal funding agencies, but the fact that we pulled it off and succeeded has made a big difference, I think. I don't know.
I think it has to
agree or disagree.
I think the relationships get built over time. We've been together, a lot of us have been together for a long time. And everybody has to be getting something out of it that really advances your own work, or your own organization's work. So I would say that, for the first few years, I was mostly there because we had committed to it, and, we had a grant which committed us to it, so, but it wasn't so clear like what we're getting out of it other than the grant. But I think, now we're no longer getting funding. Our grant ended, and we're not going to meetings, as regularly, but I still feel connected to and part of the project, because I think it's much clearer. First, we have much deeper relationships. And second, I think it's much clearer what it is that we can accomplish. And, so when it makes sense, I will still try to jump into meetings, to, with the things that are, that we can really advance together.
Sharon, do you have any thoughts?
I think, sorry,
Go
let
ahead.
me just
No, go
add
ahead.
one more thing. The other thing I think was really important is that, there are different points where, where I got really frustrated. And it's like, it's like we have to just do this thing, because it's part of the grant. And, that was like very frustrating to me. But actually, it was at that point that we were able to think it through, talk about it, and adapt what it was that we could do that would deliver on the grant proposal, but would actually serve the community needs and something we wanted to do. And that's when we landed on the using the health lens analysis to do the master plan. Because otherwise, to us, it was like, okay, we're going to do this health lens analysis. What does that do for us exactly? Yeah.
Great point.
I would say that it is, to Lydia's last point, the flexibility of the group of like, yes, we've made this commitment, but how can we fulfill the commitment to our funders while also doing a project that has meaning, was really important during the funding period. I will also observe during the time when I was going regularly to meetings, there's this sort of feeling that if you're at the meeting, you're part of CAFEH, even if you haven't gone to meetings for the last 6 months. It's great that you showed up that week. And that sort of CAFEH being, yes, a core group of people that sustain it, but then also whoever has the motivation and capacity at that time to be involved. That flexibility and sort of generosity was a huge piece of it. And I would say now in a position where we're not specifically working on any projects, just echoing what everyone says about the relationships and the partnerships, I call upon those relationships and see those relationships in other pieces of work, even if we are not the project lead. We're working with Nilakshi on legislation language. I sent a piece of work about HEPA air filtrations to Doug to review. Ellin is helping organize something with our government affairs folks. Like, there's those touch points, even if it's not under the umbrella of CAFEH.
And I would just add that building those relationships are really important, as Sharon was saying, that may not be exactly the same thing, but having the relationship to be able to call and talk about issues that are important and related. In fact, I have to tell you, Lydia, I sent your last Chinatown Land Trust report to a friend of mine who is a social worker. He lives in New Hampshire. He's Chinese American. He actually grew up in Chinatown, and he likes to follow what's going on. So I had sent it to him, and he wrote back. He was really appreciative of it. So, those relationships, I think go in interesting ways.
In terms, I wonder, all important points in terms of the value of the relationship. So in the work end, when the grant ends, the work doesn't end, is what I'm hearing from you, that the work is bigger than the grant. The grant keeps things going, funds pieces, but it sounds like there's an overall commitment to advancing the work. I always say advancing justice, that's bigger than the grant within your partnership. And I also heard that piece around with the relationship, that flexibility and how you're balancing, kind of making sure that there's community benefit in the context of the research.
Well, in some ways, we have more time to spend on the impacting the community. You know, because we can't do political work on the grant, a lot, you know, we're able to now focus really on, you know, trying to get institutional support for, you know, the changes we want to make, which is, you know, a very time-consuming process.
And although you weren't able to do as you say, political work, no advocacy with federal funds, we got that. But there, it sounds like there's some policy work that's happened in terms of legislation and work there. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what you've accomplished in those areas at all.
Ellin, you've been equally part of the most recent discussions
Why
as
don't
I am.
you go ahead and I'll follow up, and we can also comment.
Ellin identified that a group of community-based organizations have been meeting the environmental justice legislative table, and that they were interested in talking about air qualities, and made the connection. The group is chaired by the Conservation Law Foundation.
Yeah.
And so Ellin brought in Tufts, the environmental engineering team, and MAPC to sort of support fleshing out that bill. So I think that's the most recent statewide policy that we've been working on. But I think Ellin also sort of highlighting all the advocacy that was done around I-93 with Mass DOT around the sound barriers, and then also last summer, is it? With the transportation safety was another sort of example of like bringing this up in policy arenas.
Yeah. It will be a year in May since we had that big rally, but the work has not stopped. It's, you know, ongoing. You know, and I think one of the things that, you know, it's a challenge once you get into the policy area. It's really challenging because you know, changing policies and legislation in Massachusetts is not easy. So, you know, we have our work cut out for us.
I think we should mention also that we had a non-research grant that was not constrained in terms of the policy from the Kresge Foundation. And with that, one of the things we did is we actually wrote a zoning ordinance for the city of Somerville. It ended up not being implemented or possible to implement, but we were able to use a different funding mechanism that afforded more flexibility and allowed us to do things that federal research funding would not do. So for that, you know, that was a 3-year grant. It was a while ago, but we poured a lot of time and energy into thinking about what could Somerville do to implement a policy that was protective of traffic pollution.
And I would say because of that work that CAFEH did, and MAPC was part of its step in Somerville, but realizing the limitations of zoning has put us in a position to also have conversations with municipalities about like what might be possible in their ordinances outside of the zoning ordinance. And though nothing has come to fruition yet, we've had conversations about, say, with the money that's coming down from the federal government about HVAC upgrades in municipal buildings such as schools and housing authority controlled buildings, sort of recognizing the limitations of zoning and recognizing how hard it is to change building code has allowed us to start thinking in conversations, what are other types of municipal policy where we could bring this up as a co-benefit for work that people are already doing.
Yeah.
Wonder if I'm just paying attention to time as well. I want to give the folks in the audience a chance to ask any questions. I see that you've been answering some questions in chat already. Are there any questions from the audience? Lydia, do you want to talk a little bit about the Reconnecting Communities Act?
I didn't mean right now. I just meant like, hey, all CAFEH people, we should talk about that.
Yeah.
Because there is this reconnecting communities that, you know, is it's like federal legislation that
Yeah.
we should be figuring out, like, what does that translate into?
Yeah, I actually didn't know it. I don't know anything about that. So I would be very interested.
I don't know much about it, but
Right.
it sounds like that's right up our alley. I think it's about redressing wrongs, that have happened because of highway construction.
Yeah, I think the idea is that highways have split and isolated communities across the country in different cities. And are there ways to address that? And I agree with you, Lydia. I think that's quite relevant to us. And maybe we've been so focused on getting work done, we haven't looked up and thought about this other aspect, and we should. Linda, if you don't mind, I think one other thing we should say is the effort to translate our research into practice. And there's been a lot of talk about the health lens analyses and the effort it was sort of a community level intervention, but the other path that we followed is air filtration, air purifiers, filtrations in HVAC systems in buildings. And we have that the culmination of that is a clinical trial in the city of Somerville right now that we're midway through, that is putting air purifiers in people's homes and looking for whether that is beneficial for their blood pressure, for blood biomarkers of inflammation. So we really moved into both individual interventions and community level interventions. And I think that happened quickly for us because we're a community engaged set of projects, and residents and community leaders are not happy being studied forever, right? I mean, at some point they're like, okay, there's a problem, or there appears to be a problem. What are you going to do about it? And so it forced us to think about interventions, or both at the policy, they're talking about the state level with legislation, at the city level with zoning codes, at individual building construction. The new elementary school in Chinatown will have a vastly better filtration and ventilation system than previous, because the headmaster there attended our charrette and got won over to this issue and has pursued it for 10 years. And then these individual, can we show whether these air purifying units that you can put in your home, whether they have a benefit for people living near the highway and are protected. So we really moved heavily in that. We're still studying the problem, but we've sort of done parallel tracks, study the problem more and look at possible solutions or ways to address it.
And I would thank you, Doug, for that. And I would also note that another sort of message that came out of CAFEH for me was the need for increased monitoring of ultrafine particulate matter, so these non-regulated criteria and pollutants. And I have seen the bill that I just mentioned that Ellin and Dr. Nalakshi Hada have been working on as an example of, there's a piece of it that's about amending building code to upgrade filtration systems, as Doug mentioned. And then there's a piece of it which is about increasing sensor networks across the state. And that is an area where I've also seen a lot of work and where we've been involved in a lot of conversations, not as people who would own the sensors, but talking through with the people who've been submitting bills and submitting grants to increase sensor networks across the state for these pollutants that are currently only being measured at a regional level or not at all.
Sharon, I wonder if the folks came off mute. I don't know if there's any questions in the audience or, oh, Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's more an observation. First of all, this is the first time that I have seen the full spectrum of your really fabulous work in Boston. That is so important for so many people, and Somerville. I used to work in Somerville, actually, so long ago when the air was really polluted. But as some of you know, I'm from Hartford, and Doug has been working with us, and so has Linda, to see how some of the work that you've been doing in the Boston area can find its way to Hartford. And it seems to me that, there's not really very much activity that I'm familiar with. It's not my field, but But certainly I'm not seeing a lot of work on air pollution or ultrafine particles going on in this area. And we've tried to get something started, but I think we really need to have a groundswell of support at the community level. So, bringing this show to Hartford, whether on Zoom through our now 11-year-old Community Research Alliance, that I think would be an excellent idea. And I'd love to see us do something like that in the next year if you were willing to take a little time from your schedules to speak to a Hartford group. Would be great.
Sure.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. It's really inspiring, and I have so many ideas about. I'm one of the senior editors on it's really a global platform that allows for descriptions of the multiple projects like yours, the guidelines that you've been suggesting, curriculum that may be used in the universities around the Boston area and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping to encourage some of you to describe your work, maybe in a video or whatever works for you, so that other people can really broadly be exposed to it. It's really good.
Exciting to see community partners in Somerville getting together, and Chinatown getting together with community partners in Hartford neighborhoods. Exciting opportunities.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I hope that can happen in the future.
Great.
So
excellent. We also have another question in the chat from Martha, who asked us, have you used data to convince policymakers of the need for change? What are the communication challenges? So communication in terms of communicating to policymakers. Is that, Martha, did I capture your question?
Yeah, that was my question. I mean, there's communicating to the community, and then the community brings their voice to the policymakers. And then the other path, I guess, is communicating data directly to the policymakers. So I was just curious how CAFEH views those two, that second way of communicating directly to policy people.
Does anyone want to take that? I see both Sharon
I can
and Doug,
say
or
I can
Ellin.
say one thing about that. I think that in Somerville, the local elected officials have been pretty interested in these issues. So trying to get them engaged has not been super difficult. I also think that we have a wonderful state legislative delegation who have been incredibly supportive. So we're very fortunate for that, and they're very interested. And I remember when the COVID thing was just beginning, and I was having a conversation with Senator Ellin, and she was raising the issue about air filtration in schools, and and she connected it to the work that we're doing when we were talking. So I mean, that's important. So I think we haven't had some struggles that I think exist in other communities.
Doug, you once said something that really stuck with me.
No, go ahead first, and then I just have something to add, but go ahead, Sharon.
Well, I was actually going to use your words, where you once said, if thinking beyond the Somerville context, but that if all it took was for a couple of scientists to come to Congress and testify, that we wouldn't have the situation that we're in now. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
reflecting that, like, data is great, research is so important, but thinking through how you then translate that to policymakers and make them care about it is like what Lydia and Ellin and Wig do day in, day out, and is such an important step.
Yeah, I agree with that. We've done a number of things. I agree with Ellin, first of all, that the Somerville delegation is on board and they've digested the information and they know it at a very deep level for people who are elected officials. But I do think it's challenging. Changing policy is always hard and slow, and it takes a lot of effort over a long time. It's frustrating, Jay, I was thinking about what you're saying. It's frustrating to me that we've done all this work over so much time and our influence is local. So, right, and we look sometimes, WIC helped us do this, look at Southern California, and they've done a bunch of stuff regionally there. But when what do we have to do? Do we have to go to every city and do 10 years of NIH studies to get that city or those states to respond? That's crazy. It shouldn't take that, but policy change is very slow and very hard in my experience. So the fact we've made progress is good. I appreciate what we've done so far.
Like we need an organizing campaign.
Yeah, and and then the NIH grants really don't fund that. Maybe there needs to be more funding of the organizing rather than just the research.
So just to make a comment about that, I've been learning from our colleagues, Doug, that there is a social justice movement in philanthropy that is supporting community organizing. And Linda, I'm sure you've been following that, maybe part of it. So maybe that's a way to get movement. It still remains local because funders don't fund national networks, but there may be ways of thinking about regional networks and so on. So that might be a way to go. Yeah, NIH is very restricted.
What I've seen in the policy world, at least in trying to take the California examples and translate it to Massachusetts, one of the things that you run into is that state by state, the policy context is so different.
Yeah,
and what's possible in California runs into a lot more barriers in Massachusetts, both barriers of will, but also legislative barriers. And I guess that's sort of poking to the need of like a national movement opposed to just state by state. But I will also reflect that one of the challenges, sort of, Martha, to return to the question of communication that I'm seeing even now is communicating complicated science in a way that is compelling to decision makers without losing the nuance and accuracy of that information. And that is a constant tension in this work. And I think it speaks to the importance of both having the community side and the academic side involved, but also sort of thinking through that sort of transition of power when the conversation has to switch to the policymakers. How are you setting them up to talk about the work in a way that is accurate and nuanced?
Great point.
That's so important. And one of the things we haven't touched on that much is how much we have brushed up against and engaged with issues of health communication and strategies. And it's everything from, I wrote a popular science book about this topic to try and at that level, to having fact sheets about each of our research studies on the website, to doing focus groups with fact sheets with different subpopulations. And then most recently doing plain language infographics, working with Sabrina Kurtz-Rossi at Tufts, who's a health communication expert. Man, that's hard to get down to 4 or 5 visual panels with a few words on each panel. And we're trying to condense 50 scientific papers onto that. It's hard, but we do grapple with that. And I think it's really important. And I think more groups, more research efforts, especially community engaged research efforts, need to explore that terrain and try and make progress in that way.
With that, we're gonna have to, we're at our time for this evening. I'm sorry, Ellin, we wrap up at 6. We want to thank you so much to the CAFEH team, Ellin and Lydia and Sharon and Doug for joining us tonight. I see some other CAFEH folks in the audience, Wig and Martha. But I think it's really just a great example of having to think through all the different aspects, from the science to prioritizing community concerns and community priorities, but then how do you communicate that to policy? So many lessons in this session this evening, which will be made available on the website. But I do want to put a plug in that we'll be here on the 3rd Thursday next month as well, having a conversation about housing. Sharon, maybe you want to come back. You mentioned housing. We're going to be talking about housing and health and really thinking about housing justice. We'll hear from Don Belkin Martinez from the School of Social Work, as well as Mike Lebbia from City Life Vida Urbana. And we have one other speaker who may be joining us as well, that we're just waiting to hear back from. But we're really excited to have a conversation about housing in Massachusetts and where we are and how that's impacting people's health. So with that, I'll stay on in case there are questions, but we do want to let you all go because it's 6 o'clock and we promised we'd end at 6. Now it's 6:01.
Thank you.